This is The Quiet End, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled Ashes of the Seraphim. Let's begin. In the twilight that followed a battle no one could call a victory, the air hung heavy with the scent of scorched earth and despair. The soldiers moved silently, their faces hollowed by exhaustion, boots scraping against cracked soil that refused to yield. They had seen horrors that no man should witness, yet their eyes fell on something now that seemed to defy even the madness of war. It was a crater, vast and unnaturally symmetrical, its edges still smoldering, as though it had been torn into existence only moments ago. At its heart lay a mound of ash, fine and pale as bone dust. Scattered among it were fragments of something that gleamed dully in the dim light, a twisted, blackened structure that seemed almost organic. As the group drew closer, the realization struck with a clarity that sent chills through their marrow. It was a wing, not of any bird or beast, but something far greater, far more terrible. One soldier, a young man named Elias, reached out instinctively, his fingers trembling as they brushed against a feather. It crumbled to ash instantly, but not before a strange warmth coursed through his hand. Then came the sound, the faintest whisper, like a breath exhaled from nowhere, carrying with it a chorus of faint cries. They were not heard so much as felt, reverberating deep within their chests, clawing at something primal within them. "Did you hear that?" someone murmured, but no one answered. They instead began to gather the ash, their movements slow and reverent as though compelled by an unseen force. The wind picked up, swirling the ash into fleeting shapes that almost resembled faces, anguished, pleading faces, before dissipating into the ether. Elias froze, his eyes wide, his voice a hoarse whisper. "These aren't just ashes. This is something else." The others didn't reply, but their silence spoke volumes. The unspoken truth hung over them like a shroud. Whatever had fallen here was no mere creature, no artifact of their broken world. It was something divine, or something that had once been. The first night after discovering the crater, none of the soldiers slept peacefully. Elias woke with a start, his breath ragged, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The vision had been so vivid, so real, a being of light, once radiant and pure, writhing as flames consumed its form. Its screams had shaken the heavens, and in its agony the skies turned crimson, raining something thick and dark over a city that burned without end. He glanced at the others, their faces pale in the faint moonlight, eyes darting as though still seeing horrors from their dreams. By the second night, the dreams had become a shared torment. Each man woke gasping, clutching at their chests as though the visions were suffocating them. One soldier, Mathis, was the first to speak of it aloud. "I saw it again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The angel, it wasn't dying, it was angry." Heads turned toward him, eyes wide, and though no one replied, it was clear they all understood. They had seen the same thing, every detail. It was on the third night that the youngest of them, a boy scarcely out of his teenage years, began to whisper in his sleep. At first the words seemed meaningless, a string of guttural sounds. But by morning, Elias recognized them, though he couldn't say how. They were prayers, ancient prayers, spoken in a language none of them should know. The boy, Samuel, couldn't explain it. Tears streamed down his face as he stammered, I don't know what it means. It just comes to me." Tension began to fester among the group. Fear turned to paranoia, each man glancing at the others with suspicion. "You're hiding something," Mathis accused Elias that evening, his voice sharp. "You touched it first. Maybe you brought this on us." Elias stood abruptly, fists clenched. "I didn't. We're all seeing the same thing, Mathis. It's not just me." The wind howled outside their makeshift shelter, carrying with it the faintest echo of those cries they had felt at the crater. And as darkness fell once more, none of them dared close their eyes fully, for fear of what awaited them in the abyss of their minds. They found the village just as the sun dipped below the horizon, its dull orange glow casting long shadows over the empty streets. At first glance, it seemed untouched by the decay of the world around them. The houses stood firm, their windows unbroken, but the silence was wrong. No birds called, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to die at the edge of the village, leaving only the suffocating weight of stillness. As they entered, the ash they carried began to glow faintly, a a sickly pale light that pulsed as though alive. Elias felt it through the cloth he had wrapped it in, the faint warmth seeping into his hand. The others must have noticed too, for their eyes darted nervously to the containers they carried. The air grew heavier with each step, a pressure building in their chests, as though the village itself resented their presence. "We should leave," Samuel muttered, clutching the crude wooden cross around his neck. His voice barely broke the oppressive silence. But Mathis snapped. "Where else are we supposed to go? There's nothing out there but death. At least here we have shelter." One of the houses caught Elias's attention. Its door hung slightly ajar, revealing a dim interior. He stepped inside, the others following hesitantly. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of burnt wood, or was it flesh? His eyes scanned the room, and that's when he saw it, a mirror on the far wall, its frame tarnished with age. At first it seemed unremarkable, just another relic of a forgotten time. But as he approached, he noticed faint etchings on the glass, barely visible in the dim light. Wings, delicate, intricate, yet broken. "Elias!" Mathis called from behind him, but his voice seemed distant, muffled, as though it came from another world. Elias couldn't look away from the mirror. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't him. The face in the glass twisted, the skin blackened and peeling, crimson streaks running like tears from hollow eyes. The wings behind the figure weren't etched anymore. They were real, charred and broken, twitching as if in agony. He stumbled back with a cry, knocking over a chair. The others rushed in, their faces pale as they saw the look of terror frozen on his face. "What did you see?" Samuel whispered. Elias couldn't answer. The mirror now reflected only their weary forms, but the image of the burned figure was seared into his mind, and the ash in his hand pulsed again, hotter this time, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. By the fourth day, the soldiers had become strangers even to themselves. The once faint whispers that seemed carried by the ash had grown sharper, louder, intruding into their waking thoughts. Elias couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes boring into him, though the village remained lifeless. Samuel no longer prayed aloud. He sat muttering to himself, his lips moving in frantic, wordless patterns. And Mathis had begun to scratch at his own skin, as though trying to claw something unseen from underneath it. The hallucinations came without warning, vivid and unrelenting. Elias stumbled out of one of the houses, his breath catching as he saw himself standing in a cathedral, its walls crumbling. His hands, trembling and stained, clutched a broken chalice. Around him, desecrated relics lay shattered, and a choir of unseen voices screamed accusations in a language he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. When he blinked, the vision was gone and he was back in the village, but the nausea lingered. It was Mathis who finally broke. He stormed into their makeshift camp as the faint glow of their ash seemed to intensify, illuminating the dark corners of the room. "It's speaking to me," Mathis growled, his eyes wild. He raised his container of ash, trembling as though it burned his hand. "It's not just ash, it's judgment. And it says we must be cleansed. We must give something back. What are you talking about?" Elias snapped, though his voice wavered. Mathis turned on him with a look of pure madness. "Sacrifice, that's what it wants. That's how we end this." The room erupted in chaos. Samuel screamed, backing into a corner, clutching the cross at his neck. Elias lunged at Mathis, trying to wrest the ash from his grip. But Mathis was stronger, his desperation fueling his strength. The others shouted, their voices indistinguishable in the din. A chair toppled, the faint light from the ash casting grotesque shadows on the walls as the men struggled. When the fight ended, the group was no longer whole. Mathis stormed out into the night, his laughter echoing in the still air. Samuel fell to his knees, rocking back and forth as he whispered frantic prayers. And Elias, his chest heaving, stared at the spilled ash on the floor, which now glowed brighter than ever, as if mocking him. They were alone now, each man isolated, left to face whatever torment the ash had yet to reveal. It began with Samuel. The youngest among them, already fragile from the weight of the dreams, now sat in the corner of their crumbling shelter, unmoving, his eyes glazed as though gazing at something far beyond the room. Elias approached cautiously, the pale glow of the ashes casting eerie light across Samuel's face. "Samuel," he whispered, but the boy didn't respond. Instead, when he opened his mouth, the voice that poured forth wasn't his own. It was deep, resonant, inhuman. "You carry the ashes of rebellion," the voice intoned, each word vibrating in the air. Elias staggered back, clutching his chest as the weight of the voice seemed to press against him. It was no salvation that fell from the heavens, no gift to mankind. It was I. The glow of the ashes flared, filling the room with a blinding light, and in that moment, Elias saw it. A towering figure, wings aflame, a face both beautiful and horrifying. It wasn't a vision of mercy, but of rage and ruin. "I was Seraphim," the voice continued through Samuel, his body now trembling violently. "I stood at the highest altar, but I defied the order. I rebelled against the throne, and for my defiance I was cast down, burned, erased." Samuel's head tilted back unnaturally, and as he spoke, the other soldiers, those who hadn't already fled into the night, gathered, their faces pale. "But my fall was not the end. I vowed to bring ruin, to drag your kind into the abyss with me." The soldiers gasped as the glow of the ashes surged again, and the memories they had suffered became clearer. They weren't their sins, they were its memories, fragments of its wrath. Cities burning, skies weeping red, the angel's fire consuming everything in its path. "You carry my torment now," the voice hissed, Samuel's eyes rolling back into his head, his body writhing. "My suffering will echo through you, through all of you, until the end of time." And then Samuel collapsed, the glow of the ashes dimming to a faint shimmer. Elias knelt beside him, his hands shaking. The room was silent, save for the faint sound of the wind outside. But the truth was clear now. They hadn't stumbled upon a relic of divine grace. They had unearthed a curse, a fragment of divine fury that would never rest. By morning, the changes had begun. The first was Mathis, his flesh cracking like old parchment, blackened veins spreading like roots beneath his skin. He screamed, clawing at himself, but the ash refused to let go. One by one, the others succumbed. The glow of the ashes pulsed within them now, their bodies twisted and unrecognizable, mockeries of humanity, walking effigies born of divine wrath. Elias staggered through the ruined village, desperation blinding him to the horror around him. In his hand was the container of ash, its glow unbearable, its weight inexplicably heavier. He stumbled to the outskirts, where the scorched fields stretched endlessly. "I can stop this," he whispered, though his voice cracked under the strain. "I can end this." He flung the ashes into the wind, their faint light scattering like fireflies into the air. But the moment they touched the ground, the earth began to blacken, the soil turning to lifeless dust, the wind carrying the cursed particles far beyond the horizon. His heart sank as he realized the truth. It was too late. The ashes were not bound to them alone. They were bound to the world. One by one, the other soldiers fell, their bodies crumbling into smoldering husks. When Elias turned, Samuel, or what remained of him, stood at the edge of the field. His form was barely human now, his hollow eyes burning with an unnatural light, his mouth curling into something that might have been a smile, or a grimace. He raised his head to the sky, now choked with ash clouds that blotted out the sun. And then he whispered, the words carrying on a wind that no longer felt alive. "It's not over." The horizon darkened, the shadows stretching as the ash spread further, swallowing the light. The earth groaned beneath its weight, and in the distance the faint cries of anguish began anew, carried across a world that could no longer escape the fall. So tell me, dear listener, when the wind carries whispers and the air grows heavy with ash, will you dare to breathe it in, or will you hold your breath and hope it's not too late? Subscribe for more chilling tales and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next quiet end.